That's okay. That's okay, because you can submit questions using the Q&A feature. There are representatives from the League of Women Voters who will be going through those questions and combining redundant questions together. We're trying to get to as many of your questions as possible, and I'll ask that you please frame your questions as questions, not so much as comments or attacks. There will be a digital clock on the screen. The first question that the candidates will respond to, they'll have 90 seconds to address it, each one. The second question, they'll have 2 minutes to respond to. After that, each candidate will get 1 minute per response. So in general, most questions will be 1 minute long. If in that response, a candidate says something, calls out another candidate, then the person who's been called out has the opportunity for up to 30 seconds to counter that remark. They will likely not be mentioning the other person's name because they will be giving them free airtime. But if it happens, we'll give the candidate an opportunity to respond. And if they get called out again, the other candidate will have 30 seconds to respond to that. No more than one, we'll call it a rebuttal per candidate. Otherwise, they just get 1 minute per response. That's how that works. There are no opening statements, although the first question is general and like an opening statement. There will be a closing statement. Before today's event, we had a coin toss to see who would go first. And as a result of that coin toss, Faisal will be going first, then Hydee. And at the very end of our program, then Faisal will be giving the first closing remark and Hydee will be giving the second closing remark. For the digital clock, you'll know it's getting close to time because the color will change. So candidates will know it's time to wrap up their comments. If they get over the time by more than a couple of seconds, then we'll hit that mute button. We expect that tonight will be a civil discourse, a interesting exchange. We're going to add lots of light to these issues without adding a lot of heat to these issues so that you voters can make more informed decisions about who you would like to see in that LA City Attorney's Office, a very important position here in the city of Los Angeles. That said, if the candidates don't answer your question, I have been given permission to push back a little bit and demand an answer. We'll see. I think these candidates are up to the challenge. That said, we're ready for the questions. So I'm going to start with the very first question, and this question goes to you, Faisal. Tell us why you believe you are the best candidate for LA City Attorney.
Well, thank you very much for hosting this event. I think it's very nice of you guys to do this event, and this is a very much overlooked race. So I do appreciate all of you guys being here and taking your time to listen to both of our vision. Let me first start off by telling you a little bit about myself, and then I'll tell you why I believe that I'm the right person for this position. So my name is Faisal Gill. I am an immigrant. I immigrated to the United States from Pakistan. I grew up in a very working class environment. My father was a cab driver and my mother worked in various retail stores. It's that experience of living with uncertainty on a day-to-day basis that I'm bringing to the city attorney's office. I want to be a city attorney for the people. I believe I have the experience and the vision for this job. I've been a criminal defense attorney and a civil rights attorney for 20 years. I've also had extensive experience in civil litigation, and I've also been a government attorney advising senior government officials, which basically encapsulates all the departments that the city attorney has: criminal law, civil litigation, and advising government officials. More importantly than that, I have a vision for this office. I think the city attorney's office can do a lot more than it has been doing. I believe the city attorney's office should be the office for the people, and it's a job of the city attorney to basically protect the people. Although I provide advice to city council and mayor and all the departments, I am not their lawyer. I'm simply their legal advisor, but my client, in my opinion, is the city, and that's what I'm bringing to the table. Thank you.
Thank you, Faisal, for the response to that question. Same question to you, Hydee. Tell us why you believe you are the best candidate for Los Angeles City Attorney.
Well, first, let me thank our host, the League of Women Voters of Greater LA, the Los Angeles Valley College, the National Council of Jewish Women of LA, and USC Center for the Political Future. I thank all the moderators, and I thank everyone who's listening for taking the time to come watch this forum. I really appreciate it. My name is Hydee Feldstein Soto. I was born and raised in San Juan, Puerto Rico, and I left the island to study at Swarthmore College and Columbia Law School. 7 winters was enough, and I moved to LA in 1982. I believe I'm the best candidate to be our next city attorney for a number of reasons. First is my experience, my qualifications, and the fact that I'm right on the issues when it comes to having a city that works for us all. I am running to reduce homelessness, to end corruption at City Hall, to tackle our crises and make sure that our city is safe. That means cracking down on domestic violence, guns, hate crimes, and human trafficking. Our city needs safe schools, safe neighborhoods, and the services for the folks that currently are not only unhoused, but that may not be able to care for themselves without assistance. I have spoken to tens of thousands of Angelenos since launching this campaign, and I have spent my career managing lawyers and practicing law with stakes as high as those that we see at City Hall. I want to use that experience to fix not only the office, but City Hall, and make it work for the people of the city to solve the problems that we all see every day. I will create a neighborhood law corps, which will be like a cross between the Peace Corps and legal aid, to serve our residents and businesses and address the matters that matter to you. I'll end no bid contracts that are driving the cost of building housing to 10 times higher what it should be, all while enriching political insiders. I have never run for office before, and I am clear that I will not seek another office besides this one. I will be an independent voice for the people of Los Angeles, a city that I love and know well. Thank you.
Well, thank you both for the responses to that very first question. We're going to start out with some tough issues, and let's start with what's really in recent headlines. This was a question posed to us from Lionel. He had a question about corruption in city government. It's a question that's on many Angelenos' minds. Many Angelenos are, of course, shocked, hurt, they're furious about the deeply offensive comments by LA City Council members in a secretly recorded conversation. While Miri Martinez has resigned, council members Gill and Kevin De Leon have refused to abdicate their offices. Question is, what do you think the city attorney's office should do in this situation, if anything? And more broadly, how should the city attorney work to prevent corruption by government officials? You each have 2 minutes to respond to that question, and Faisal, you're first.
Sorry. All right, sorry, then muted. Look, the city attorney, I think, has a huge role to play, and that's one of the biggest things that I've said. City attorney should be there to root out corruption. You know, I believe the city attorney can hold city council members accountable. I believe the city attorney can prosecute city officials, whether they be elected officials or appointed officials in city government. And as a city attorney, I will do that. As a city attorney, you know, I will be there in just about every aspect of City Hall decision-making when it comes to contracts. You know, we know development is rife for corruption. You have, you know, a redistricting process, which I believe should be independent. You know, when the corruption scandal came out, when we heard, you know, the vile things that the 3 of them were saying, I was one of the first ones to call for all 3 to resign, or certainly Nuri to resign. And I think all 3 should resign. You know, Kevin De Leon and Gill should resign. You know, I also believe that it should be the city attorney who should be leading this investigation. I applaud the attorney general for doing it. But one of the things that has not happened is that the city attorney has not held folks accountable. You know, we have a view that the city attorney is supposed to be the lawyer and the client as a city council. So the city attorney cannot go after the council and its members, while they're there. That makes absolutely no sense, because the city attorney can prosecute city council members and every officer for any other crime, i.e., you know, speeding, DUI, reckless, domestic, everything else. But for some reason, when it comes to corruption, we go, oh no, the city attorney cannot do that. That's going to change. And once that changes and once City Hall knows that I will come after them, that's going to be a big thing. I am an independent city attorney, and I'm not supported by a lot of the City Hall establishment. And I think there's a reason for that.
Thank you for that response, Faisal. Hydee, same question. What do you think the city attorney's office should do about this corruption we've seen, not just specifically this recent incident, but more broadly? How would you, as city attorney, work to prevent corruption by government officials?
20% of our city council had either been indicted or convicted and served jail time prior to this current event. Another 20% now is being called for resignation. And that recording, an hour, 19 minutes and 32 seconds, because I listened to all of it, is absolutely appalling on many levels. It isn't just the casual racism, it is the divvying up of our city for personal political power and personal political gain. So where do I start? I start with who under the city charter is charged with doing this and what tools do they need to get it done. I start with the fact that most public corruption is a felony and should be treated seriously as a felony. And therefore a referral to the Department of Justice, to the Attorney General, or to the district attorney will actually result in the right kind of investigation and the right kind of consequences, as opposed to misdemeanor jurisdiction, which really doesn't go very far. I continue with the fact that the Ethics Commission right now serves at the pleasure of the person who appoints them. So I would require, I think the time is ripe for City Council to require that the ethics commissioners be independently appointed for a term of years, say 5 years, so it crosses over into the next administration. And I would request subpoena power, investigatory subpoena power, not only for the Ethics Commission, but for the City Attorney's Office. Right now, City Attorney's Office doesn't have the power to issue subpoenas to individuals within or without city government. I also would support an independent redistricting committee. I would support expanding the number of council members. I believe Council Member Rahman has made a motion to expand it to 21 or 25, I'm not sure. But that kind of representation would make it much easier for the independent redistricting committee to give everybody a voice in our city. A lot of the difficulty has been because there are so many voices. We have the same number of council members today that we had 100 years ago, and we are multiple times the population. Time, otherwise I'd keep talking.
Appreciate your response to that question very much to both candidates. We're now going to the phase of our forum where you'll each have 1 minute to respond to these questions. So hopefully we can get to as many questions as possible. So this next question has to do with the city charter. The city charter is to Los Angeles as the Constitution is to the United States. Our charter was last revised 23 years ago in 1999. One of the main responsibilities of the city attorney is, as you both said, to advise city council and city boards and departments on pending or adopted policies and their implementation based on the city charter. In your opinion, and this question goes first to you, Faisal, in your opinion, what improvements should be made to the city charter?
Oh, I will need a long time to answer that question, a lot longer than a minute. Look, there's a lot of improvements that I would have, put to the city charter. I do think city attorneys should have subpoena power, although I don't think, when you're going after your own department, you need a subpoena power for that. But I mean, that would be certainly helpful. I think that it should be much clearer since there seems to be confusion on certain folks as to who the client is. I think the city attorney should be the first person to investigate any sort of a corruption, as I believe it is a city attorneys do. I do believe that we need to expand the city council districts because I do believe that 15 city council districts are certainly not enough. So I certainly agree with that, as we have found out in this last crisis. That, if a council member does not want to resign, absent basically facing some sort of a charge, there really is no real mechanism to get that council member to resign. I think that there should be a mechanism, whether it's, similar to what's going on in Measure A right now, which, the majority or a super majority we need to have some mechanism to remove a council member that certainly is not, doing what they're supposed to do and is not good for the city. So, in contracting, there's certain things that I would change in the city charter as well, quite a bit. So there's a lot of things that we need to say in the city charter as we would go along. But certainly those would be the things that I would first highlight on, as well as having an IG section. So I'll expand on that later.
It's a tough question to answer in a minute, and I appreciate that you did that. So Hydee, the question goes to you, and also with a minute, what would you do? What improvements do you think should be made to the city charter?
I've been trying to keep tabs of a list of things to do. And actually, I think as of last Thursday, I was just endorsed by Erwin Chemerinsky, who chaired the last Charter Commission, for whatever that's worth. Other than clarifying many of the roles of the departments, here's the issue. The charter ultimately gives with the one hand and takes away with the other. So the first paragraph will say you have to put contracts out to bid. And the last paragraph will say, and here's a long list of exceptions, without requiring any findings or any public hearings or any proof of the exceptions. The charter has the neighborhood councils, but then says, here's the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment, without really empowering the councils directly for the participatory democracy. The charter says, here are planning commissions, but then turns around and says in 245E, but any council member can yank a project in their own district. The city charter doesn't prohibit vote trading. It not only has civil service, but it has pro bono protections for our law enforcement officials. And so there's a whole long list of sections that really need to be looked at and treated more as a governing document than as pablum to be taken away. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that. We're going through a lot of topics in short order because there are a lot of topics before us. And the next one is certainly a big topic. Mayoral candidates Karen Bass and Rick Caruso have made homelessness one of the top issues in their campaigns. It's my great pleasure to introduce my friend and a powerful champion for the unhoused here in Los Angeles, Taya Heisel. Taya is a senior at USC and the founder of Advocacy, a student organization that helps unhoused communities in Los Angeles. Taya, what's your question?
Hi, thank you for introducing me, Kamy, and I'm really excited to be here and to be able to ask this question. So my question is for both candidates, how would you enforce laws, if at all, that are often used to target unhoused individuals in Los Angeles? For example, Ordinance 4118, which makes it illegal to, quote, sit, lie, or sleep in or upon any street, sidewalk, or other public way. Other examples include similar prohibitions on misdemeanor loitering and things of the sort. So do you think these laws are necessary in dealing with our houselessness crisis, or do you think they are an inhumane criminalization of poverty, and how would you enforce them?
Me first?
Yes, please.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Well, thank you very much, Tara, for your question. I absolutely believe they're an inhumane targeting of houseless people. I think that they are not practical, and I have been very clear on 4118 that I will not enforce it. And it's because it's unconstitutional. I mean, and it's not just me who says it. The Ninth Circuit federal court has said it over and over and over and over again. I don't know how many times we need to have the Ninth Circuit say it before we finally get it that it's not constitutional. So I will not enforce it. I also will not, some of the other laws that you cited, loitering, trespassing on public property, which is basically sleeping in the parks after night. I will not enforce those. We are not going to solve the homelessness problem through the criminal justice system. And I've been very clear about that. We need to provide people with services. Last time I checked, nobody goes to jail and comes out with a house. We need to stop basically, arresting folks, taking their belongings, throwing them away, only to move them from one area to another. I will not do that.
I think this is one of those points of inflection around the city. I stand for safe schools and safe neighborhoods. I understand the Ninth Circuit rulings. I understand that we can only enforce any kind of ordinance with respect to sleeping, sitting, lying, using a blanket, using a mattress, using a pillow, having belongings on our streets, if in fact we have a credible offer of shelter or housing to offer somebody. And so my focus on addressing homelessness has been very much on bringing down the cost of the housing that we provide and making sure that we have not only 4 walls and a roof, but that we have the wraparound services that people need in order to come indoors. Having said that, there are issues of public safety. And I do think that when it comes particularly to our school children walking to school, they are entitled to safe passage without seeing drug use, without risking being attacked by someone who may be having a psychotic episode. And so I believe in buffer zones. It's the same buffer zones that we use around abortion clinics. And I don't think that it's the city attorney's prerogative to refuse to enforce a constitutionally drafted law that can and should be enforced constitutionally.
Taya, thank you for the question, and thank you both to Hydee and Faisal for answering that question. I'm sure there will be many more questions related to homelessness throughout the evening, but let's get to question number 5. And by the way, question number 5, this will also be directed to you first, Faisal, and then starting with question number 6, then Hydee, we're going to flip and go to you as the first respondent for the next 5 questions after that, and we'll keep alternating 5 by 5 by 5 until we run out of time. So this question number 5 has to do with the undocumented and with immigrants in Los Angeles. So the idea is that California has passed various protections for documented and undocumented immigrants, including the Truth Act of 2014, the Trust Act of 2016, and the California Values Act of 2018, all of which require the local governments protect the rights of immigrants regardless of their legal status. My question is, how would you use the office of city attorney to handle undocumented immigrants who may face the risk of deportation?
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. Look, first and foremost, I've practiced immigration law. I've defended people, in immigration courts as to, when they're facing deportation. Certainly, lots of folks who, in my criminal defense practice, who are either undocumented or documented, but face this issue. So the first thing the city attorney's office is going to do is anytime that we have somebody who is an immigrant, whether documented or undocumented, we're going to make sure we look at the, what effect our criminal charge is going to have on their immigration status. And that is going to be something that we're really going to take into consideration, as I believe we should. Also, I want to make it very clear to anybody who's undocumented that, your undocumented status is not going to be used against you. We are not communicating at all with any federal government agency that is involved in immigration enforcement. That is not the job of the city attorney. The job of the city attorney is to make sure that Angelenos are safe. So they have they should have no worries in, coming forward with a crime. We're going to make it easier for U visa victims to get their certifications, so then they can move to documented status, and there's going to be no room for any sort of reprisal against people who are undocumented.
Thank you for that response. Same question to you, Hydee. How would you use the office of city attorney to handle undocumented immigrants who may risk deportation?
I would want to see consideration of the immigration consequences of an arrest or of the criminal justice system. At the end of the day, immigration is a civil federal matter at our border. And as part of the administration of criminal justice, we do want to encourage people coming forward. We do want to be able to administer our criminal justice equitably and fairly across similar circumstances. And unfortunately, the undocumented status of an individual means that there can be much longer lasting and more severe consequences upon them and their loved ones, including their kids. And so from the perspective of the city attorney's office, just as it was important that we split the tie between law enforcement of the sheriff's office and LAPD with ICE, it is important to separate the role of city attorney from the border patrol or from federal law enforcement at the border. And I would be meticulous about doing so.
Thank you for that response. And I mentioned starting with this question, we're going to flip and go first to you, Hydee, and then to you, Faisal, second. So this next question, it's a good segue. The question is about, are there any crimes that you are not going to prosecute or that you will prioritize for diversion? Do you favor a moratorium on prosecuting any crimes?
No, I do not. I believe that it is part of the job of the office to prosecute crimes and to enforce our laws fairly and equitably. Now, having said that, there are defendants, there are circumstances under which I would tend to favor prosecutorial discretion. First-time offenders, youthful offenders, non-violent property crimes. The fact is that the state has taken away discretion in a number of instances and has moved the diversionary discretion from the prosecutor to the bench. But I don't believe that a city attorney can simply fold her arms and say, I disagree with this law or I don't like it, and therefore I'm not going to enforce it. That is a very dangerous position for the chief law enforcement officer of our city. And that's not a position I would take.
Thank you for that answer. Well, then, Faisal, the question is yours. Are there any crimes that as city attorney you are not going to prosecute or that you will prioritize for diversion? Do you favor a moratorium on any crimes?
Absolutely. So there are lots of crimes that do not affect public safety. In the city attorney's office, we have to use resources to get to the crimes that are affecting public safety. Let me be clear on one thing. I will prosecute serious and violent crimes. However, having said that, what I've proposed is for the first 100 days that I will review crimes that are not affecting public safety. And I will get, feedback from LAPD, from outside stakeholders, from the city attorney's office, crimes such as, a loitering outside, 19-year-old loitering outside of 7-Eleven does not affect public safety. We have other crimes such as those that do not, and prosecutors throughout the country have basically go out there and see what crimes affect public safety and what not. So yes, I want to put a lot more crime to diversion. I want to have a much more robust restorative justice system. And I want to focus our resources on what's going to make the city safer and not just basically give people unnecessary criminal records that will follow them for the rest of their lives for things like loitering or trespassing on public property.
Well, thank you for that response. So for those of you who are watching, this is a forum for Los Angeles City Attorney. We are 6 questions deep into our evening. There will be opportunity for audience questions and answers. So if you have not yet heard your question addressed, then use the Q&A feature, type in the question you'd like to hear, and hopefully we'll have a chance to get to as many of those questions as possible. The next question that we have is about civil justice issues and officer misconduct. And the question goes to you first, Hydee. And the question is framed this way. It's really from Rodney King in LA to George Floyd in Minnesota to Michael Brown in Missouri. Americans across the country have witnessed police brutality around the nation. Many people in Los Angeles have not just witnessed it, but have experienced police misconduct personally. And it has led to deep mistrust between the police and several, frankly, if not most, communities in LA. If elected, how would you use your role as city attorney to reduce officer misconduct, hold LAPD accountable, and increase community trust?
I start with the creation of a neighborhood law corps rather than a neighborhood prosecutor, which is designed to work with the residents and the businesses across the city on a variety of issues, including criminal justice issues that may come up on a case-by-case basis. Different neighborhoods have different needs. As I've gone around the city, I am reminded of the fable of the elephant with the 6 blind men. What the city feels like depends on what part of the elephant you're touching. So if you're in one neighborhood, somebody will say, oh yeah, I'm touching the ear, it's like a fan. In a different neighborhood, it's like a rope. And so the concept is to have community-based policing and to have neighborhood-based delivery of constituent services by the various departments across the city. In terms of police misconduct, which is a very broad term, and in a minute I can't really get to it, but there's a difference between federal qualified immunity, which is a constitutional principle, and POBOR, which is a state principle in Sacramento. And then there are employment protections in our city charter. I have even heard police chiefs and senior officers within the department say they would like to see some changes to permit discipline and employment consequences in circumstances where currently they can't impose it.
Understood. Well, then same question to you, Faisal. If elected, how would you use your role as city attorney to reduce officer misconduct, hold LAPD accountable, and increase community trust?
I have said from day one, this is one of the reasons that I'm running for office, I will hold LAPD accountable. I think it is, it is absolutely within the purview of the city attorney's office to do that. It is not just my job to advise every single department. It is my job to make sure that every single department is following the law, and that starts with LAPD. There are several ways I can do it. First, as my role as legal advisor to LAPD, I will be very firm as to what LAPD can and cannot do, what is constitutional, what is not constitutional. We do not want to have pretextual stops. If there's an officer that makes a mistake, then I will be very firm with that officer as to what the consequences can be, and they could be anything from employment consequences, disciplinary consequences, to our office, not taking referrals from that officer if it continues to engage in misconduct. Brady list as well. So there are lots of things that the LAPD can do, that the city attorney can do. From day one, LAPD will know that if they don't do anything wrong, they have nothing to fear from me. But if they violate people's constitutional rights, I will hold them accountable, and I will not be a rubber stamp for LAPD.
Thank you for that answer as well. And LAPD, they're the ones with the guns, but they're not the only ones with the guns in our city. This question will start with you, Hydee, and it's regarding school shootings, gun homicides, and other form of violence involving firearms. Many people concerned about gun violence in their communities. While the Second Amendment protects a person's right to bear arms, states and cities across America have put restrictions on that right in an effort to reduce gun violence. To date, the number of shooting homicides in Los Angeles is about the same as last year, but that number is about 50% higher than it was in 2019. Does LA have a gun problem? And what do you think the city attorney's office should do about guns, if anything?
I start with the fact that the city attorney's office has filed a relatively creative lawsuit as a civil action against a ghost gun manufacturer that would reduce the propensity or the availability, the ready availability of ghost guns across the state. I mean, not just in LA, but it is being head up by the LA City Attorney's Office. Time, place, and manner restrictions have long been upheld under the Second Amendment. We have a very bad Supreme Court for this issue, unfortunately. The recent decision, I think it was just a month and a half ago, that said that you can't ban concealed carry and permit open carry was, I think, a shock in the industry. And so trying to devise, again, a constitutional law that would permit the same kind of time, place, and manner restrictions that we've come to expect is important. I would create buffer zones, much as we have to protect abortion clinics, much as we have to protect schools and places where guns cannot go. And I would have, I would ask council to close the loopholes on gun shows and on unregistered, unlicensed weapons across our city. Time.
Thank you for that response. So Faisal, same question to you. Does Los Angeles have a gun problem? And what do you think the city's attorney's office should do about guns, if anything?
Yeah, I do think Los Angeles has a gun problem. I think one of the things that Mike Feuer, and I've given him a lot of credit for this, has done is gone after ghost guns, and I will continue to go after ghost guns. One of the things that I talk about is that the affirmative litigation department in the city attorney's office is something that I'm going to expand, basically, put them on steroids. And it's the affirmative litigation department that can go after, various gun manufacturers and corporations. And I will absolutely do that. I will look for any which way to get the guns off the street. Being a litigator, I have made many creative arguments in court. Some win, some don't win. But the point is to, keep holding them accountable. And the affirmative litigation department in my office is going to be the one that's going to go after a lot of gun manufacturers. We're going to build on the work that Mike Feuer has done in, going after ghost guns. That's, I think, the biggest thing that we can do, as well as education. I mean, education is a huge issue that you can, that we're going to focus on as well. And especially the people of community of colors who feel they need guns for their safety. We're going to talk to them about why that's actually leads to more dangers at times.
Thank you both for those responses. I understand it's hard to encapsulate so many views on such complex issues in a minute, but we appreciate that you're doing so we can get through as many topics as we can possibly cover within the time we have today. So my next question is also on a big topic, and you also have 1 minute. So the question is this: the City Attorney's Office is empowered under state law to represent the people of California to combat any business act that is unlawful, unfair, or deceptive, including businesses that cause environmental harm to Angelenos. This next question is about environmental justice, and I'm pleased to introduce my friend, Gabe Romero, who's a graduate student at USC studying environmental policy. Gabe, what's your question?
Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here and to be able to hear from you both about some really important topics. So like Kamy said, my question is about environmental justice. Recent city attorneys like outgoing City Attorney Fuhrer in Los Angeles have taken the issue of environmental justice very seriously. And even the California Attorney General, Rob Bonta, has started to take this very seriously too. In his time as city attorney, the outgoing city attorney sued Monsanto for contaminating our waterways with harmful chemicals, and sued S&W Atlas Iron and Metal Company for routinely ejecting dangerous scrap metals onto Jordan High School campus in South LA. These efforts were just a couple among numerous others. How can Angelenos count on you as city attorney to to protect our most routinely disadvantaged communities and prioritize environmental justice?
I assume I go first. Is that right, Kamy? Okay. Let me start by saying that I've been endorsed by both the League of Conservation Voters and the Sierra Club, and I'm very proud of both those endorsements. I have fairly detailed plans in terms of environmental justice across our city. I live within 1,200 feet of 10 operating oil wells on Pico Boulevard. So I am exquisitely conscious of the effect of environmental harm across our city. I would start with oil wells and oil leases. Council has said we don't need new leases. One of the things I know is that many of the oil leases are not necessarily digitally saved, and they are automatically renewable if you don't give at least a year or more advance notice of termination. And so I would start with a chart that charts that out so that we can effectuate the environmental policy that council has already passed. I would want to be sure that we take CEQA fairly seriously. A lot of the issues that are arising in our environment today is because Sacramento has been cutting back on the rights of CEQA. And so the city of Los Angeles, to defend our communities, needs to be in Sacramento and needs to be sure that those environmental protections no longer carve out our city. Thank you.
Thank you. So same question to you, Faisal, and Gabe, thank you for that terrific question. And it's really, how can Angelenos count on you as incoming city attorney to protect our most routinely disadvantaged communities and prioritize environmental justice in your work?
Okay. Gabe, thank you very much for that question. I've been endorsed by Youth Climate Strike, who I just love, and that's the next generation of our environmental leaders. They're out there, they're fighting, and it's great to have young people involved in the environmental fight. Look, put it simply, I'm going to go after corporate polluters. Again, the affirmative litigation department is something that I'm going to use, quite effectively and quite often. We've got all the oil wells there that council has said, need to be stopped. But what about all the cleanup from there? I guarantee you the corporations and the companies are not going to voluntarily just do that. They're going to go out, they're going to basically do the minimum they have to do to leave. As city attorney, I'm going to be there making sure they do everything that they are required to do in there. And that's going to require holding them accountable. And I know it's not going to make me very popular with business, but that's the way it is. I want environmental justice, and majority of the oil wells affect people of color disproportionately, and I'm going to keep that in mind. But I am going to hold corporate polluters responsible and go after them in a very aggressive way, not just their companies. I'm going to go after the executives as well.
Thank you for that response. This next question is question number 10, and it will be directed to you first, Hydee, and to you, Faisal, second. And then the following question will be an audience question, and then we'll flip and they'll go back for the next 5 to Faisal first and Hydee second. So this one to you, Hydee, is a very broad question, and it is, what action have you taken in the last few years that best illustrates how you will execute the duties of the city attorney's office in the coming term if you are elected?
That is broad, and I've done a lot. Okay, I've served on my neighborhood council for the last 6 or 7 years. I have reached into my own pocket and collected soil samples as co-chair of the land use committee to go take care of getting the soil sample study that we needed for a construction project that was on polluted land. I have traveled to Sacramento on my own nickel to deal with any number of the issues that affect our city and our neighborhoods. I have been accessible, and I've walked the community, and if you come down my street, there's Hydee Feldstein Soto signs everywhere, of course, but that's beside the point. I have taken time to speak to people from every walk of life to learn the issues. I have spoken to prosecutors, defense lawyers, unhoused individuals, incarcerated persons, people in the apprenticeship programs to get a handle around the criminal justice system. And the way I approach a problem is to listen and learn before I step into something. And that's what I would do as city attorney.
Well, thank you to both. I really appreciate that we're seeing a distinction between your philosophies and visions for the city attorney's office. And my next question is coming from—
Faisal doesn't have to answer that one. That's not fair.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, you're right, Hydee. That's my apologies. You're right. This question goes to Faisal. Thank you for correcting me. I appreciate it. This question is for Faisal, and the question is, what action have you taken in the last few years that best illustrates how you will execute the duties of the city attorney's office in the coming term if you are elected?
Yeah. So what got me into the city attorney's race was I had a client who was wrongfully arrested. And it took me over 2 years to get justice from the city attorney's office. And I had to fight for it. Now, the way I started was I started in a collaborative process, trying to reach out to the city attorney's office and saying, look, this person is clearly wrongfully arrested. And there was no dispute they were wrongfully arrested. I mean, a woman called in and said, my boyfriend is violating a protective order, but never gave a description. My client was a Black man, and police arrested him with absolutely zero probable cause and zero evidence. The women who made the call said, no, this is not the person. So I tried my best to work collaboratively with the city attorney's office and explaining to them what needs to happen, but I didn't get anywhere. When that didn't work, I went ahead and filed a lawsuit and took on the city attorney's office, and I won. And even in that lawsuit, I tried to work collaboratively in working with the city attorney's office. So the way I approach a problem is I want to work collaboratively in resolving it. When that doesn't work, I'm not afraid to take on a fight, and I'm not afraid to take them on and win.
Thank you both for your answers to those first 10 questions. We're going to switch to audience questions next. And this first one that I'm going to ask is from an anonymous source, but it's something that I think speaks to what's on a lot of people's minds. And it was about how the city council recently voted to phase out the eviction moratorium, and a lack of enforcement of tenant protections has been a significant factor in residents being evicted from their homes. How do you plan to hold landlords accountable? And this question goes first to Faisal.
Look, I disagree with the city council's decision, but again, that's a policy decision. That's their right to make. But one of the things that the city attorney's office has not done is it has not enforced the tenant protection rules. And I will, the tenant harassment ordinances that exist, short-term housing ordinances that exist, I will enforce all of them. I will go after landlords that are harassing tenants, that are using, cash for evictions, that are not following the rules that exist out there. I mean, I meet with tenants on a daily basis to make sure that they know what their rights are. As city attorney, I'm going to have a very outreach program, a very robust outreach program to renters to let them know what their rights are. And they have lots of rights. currently existing in LA city ordinances. The problem is that the current city has not enforced them. The biggest one is the tenant harassment laws, ordinances that exist. And I absolutely will enforce those and go after, slumlords basically very aggressively. Especially, I think we're going to need to do that after this rent moratorium is over.
Thank you for that response. Hydee, same question to you, which is about the eviction moratorium and how do you plan to hold landlords accountable?
Okay. There's a lot of issues in this. Let me start by saying that the eviction moratorium has gone on for 3 years, and it's really time for the eviction moratorium per se to end, but we have to address the consequences on folks who may not have an alternative place to go and who may lack the financial wherewithal to pay the back rent. And that's really a fiscal issue for City Council more than anything else. We are fortunate at this point to have a tenant anti-harassment ordinance, and that tenant anti-harassment ordinance has one flaw. The attorney's fees clause in the tenant anti-harassment ordinance was drafted to say may rather than shall. I would go back to council to see if council member Rahman's amendment from may to shall is something that the council would at this point accept, and that would help tenants immeasurably in bringing their own claims. To the extent that the city attorney's office can bring those kinds of claims, there is a SNAP unit that is quite active, and I would continue to empower that SNAP unit to bring the kinds of slumlord claims that are necessary. And I would employ the ACE program, the Administrative Compliance Enforcement Program, to be able to enforce violations and do repairs to give tenants habitable apartments from behind a computer.
Understood. Well, this next question is very much along the same lines, and it is about, and this one comes from John Heath. So John, thank you for this question. It says, what can the city attorney do to incentivize the creation of more affordable housing while preserving existing communities and avoiding gentrification? It's an issue for many in Los Angeles. Rent is too damn high. So how do you make housing more affordable while preserving communities and avoiding gentrification?
I lost count. That's to me first, correct?
Correct.
Okay. First of all, I would make sure the city council follows state law. I mean, there's state law there that basically calls for building of more affordable housing, and we need more affordable housing. We need more multifamily housing. So I will make sure that the city council here is following state law. Second of all, we have an ordinance on the books, that basically goes after short-term rentals, Airbnb and other short-term rentals like that just has not been enforced. And what that's doing is that's taking units off of the long-term rental market and putting it in the short-term rental market, which basically folks can charge a lot more. And that's having a significant effect on the rental market and on the prices in Los Angeles. If the city attorney's office was just to enforce those two things, you would see a dramatic increase in the affordable housing units that are available in the city stock, and you would also see a decrease in the cost of rent. So those will be the first two things that I start with. That'll be concrete examples of bringing down the rent.
Well, Hydee, same question to you, which is about the incentivizing creation of more affordable housing while preserving existing communities and avoiding gentrification. What would you do as city attorney?
I start with the fact that currently the California Constitution prohibits the construction of public housing. Senator Ben Allen has an amendment to repeal Article 34 of the Constitution. I urge everyone to support that. It will be on your ballot in 2024. That lets government intervene to incentivize the kind of housing that we need and to build it, rather than simply incentivizing developers to build the kind of housing that they can. The part of the reason we have such a shortage of affordable housing is that projects don't pencil out with the profitability standards that are necessary when what you're doing is building affordably. And so government, as part of its mission and as part of its safety net, just like we would provide shelter or we would provide food, really ought to be building housing for residents and people who live here rather than housing for investment. We ought to be going on all cylinders to be creating the kind of housing that our residents need every single day. That goes back to my plan to reduce the cost of housing. That goes back to funding the housing with the kinds of financing that meet current market conditions, and to doing adaptive reuse and repurposing existing structures to provide housing for individuals as they come and as existing residents otherwise would suffer displacement. I didn't even get to community land trusts and ways to empower communities so that we're not displaced. Thank you.
Yes, I appreciate those responses and recognize how difficult it is to summarize really complex policy ideas and distinctions well in less than a minute. You're both doing it, so thank you for that. Because we've received so many audience questions, you're going to see me jump around a little bit in topic here. So let me just go to this question from Chris Rowe, who asks, and again, this is to you first, Faisal. In terms of environmental justice, we know that those who live near the freeways are at higher risk of asthma, other lung diseases, even heart disease. Can the city attorney, this is his proposal, can the city attorney create a law that says no residential homes can be built within 500 feet of a freeway? What do you think of that?
Well, first, the city attorney, unfortunately, cannot create any law. The city attorney can recommend, ordinances to city council, and certainly the city attorney can draft the ordinances and can advise. But it's the city council itself that actually has to pass the law in order to come. That certainly is a policy idea that I would be willing to consider. I think it, just at first blush, obviously, it makes a lot of sense to me. And one of the things that I think the city attorney should be doing in its role as an elected official should be bringing forth policy ideas that can help Angelino's, at least in environmental and their, in their health. And that's certainly one of the, policy ideas that I would certainly consider in trying to bring forth. But at the end of the day, it's going to be the council that actually has to, approve it. But I like that idea.
Thank you. Hydee, do you like the idea? What do you think about those who live near freeways having higher risk of asthma, lung disease, heart disease? Can the city attorney create a law that says no residential homes within 500 feet of a freeway?
I think that's taking an elephant gun to something that has unintended consequences. We have state law right now that says we're not allowed to downsize. We're not allowed to downzone. We're not allowed to take land that is currently zoned for residential housing and unzone it for residential housing without having all kinds of unintended consequences. So today, while that might be certainly worthwhile in terms of trying to keep people's lungs cleaner, air does travel. I'm not sure 500 feet makes that much of a difference. And I do think it's a violation of state law. I would focus much more on the move to electrification of our vehicles. I would focus much more on public transit. I would focus much more on the reduction of air pollution rather than on creating buffer zones around freeways. On the other hand, the city attorney is not a policymaker. And so a city council wanted me to try to craft a law that without violating state law could create that kind of a 500-foot buffer zone around the freeway, then yes, of course, I would do that.
Thank you for that response. So this next question, going on a different topic here, is from Erica Martin. And Erica asks, and this is to you first, Faisal, how would you go about getting mental health and especially drug addiction services for people living in Los Angeles? She says, we currently have a dearth of such services, which is especially apparent observing the homeless population.
Absolutely. Look, one of the biggest problems that we have, along with the homeless population is mental health services, mental health and drug treatment services. And I think that's what we need. And what I've said in my criminal justice reform plan is that's what I want to, that's what I want to divert people through is to services. I want to, connect them with services and not just give them a criminal record that basically, does nothing to solve the problem and just basically further exacerbates the problem because now they can't get into certain programs that, require them not to have criminal records. So I will connect them into services in, drug treatment centers, as well as mental health services. I will also work with the county services as well. I mean, it's the county that has to provide the mental health services, and I'll work with the county to see what we can do to expand, mental health services. But certainly, from my perspective as a criminal justice, where folks come in is, I want to divert people to mental health services and, look to see what ways we can do in the city attorney's office to use some of our budget to connect them to mental health services and get them mental health services. But certainly that's the diversion programs that I really want to focus on: drug treatment and mental health services, as well as look at new opportunities to get more creative drug treatment centers.
Thank you for that response. So same question to you, Hydee. This is from Erica Martin asking about getting mental health and especially drug addiction services for people in Los Angeles. What would be your thoughts or proposals for that?
This is an issue I've been involved in with tangentially for at least 4 or 5 years. I was struck by the fact that the city of Los Angeles does not have its own public health department. Long Beach does, Pasadena does, Los Angeles does not. So we are dependent upon the county. I also started investigating. We are down to 5 public psychiatric hospitals in the entire state of California, ladies and gentlemen. The beds are full with the criminal justice system, and the waiting list is 2 years long. And there was a case called Schiavetti decided in June of 2021 that said that without a psychiatric bed and medical treatment, you have to release even serial violent offenders who are incompetent to stand trial back onto our streets. So getting competent medical health services, getting folks who are experiencing psychotic episodes into a controlled environment where they can take their medication and get well is absolutely a priority. The agreement between the city and the county is only 6 pages long. It was drafted in 1964, and it vastly needs to be rewritten for contemporary grants and for contemporary circumstances so that the city gets the services it needs.
Appreciate that response. Thank you. This question comes from an anonymous source. I think it's an interesting question. I wanted to get your take on it. And Faisal, this will be to you first. This will be the 5th question to you first. So the next question will go to you first, Hydee. But for now, to Faisal, the question is about the perception of crime. So the person asks, why do you think the perception of crime is much higher than the actual crime rate? And what would you do as city attorney to make Angelenos feel safer?
Look, there's been a lot of talk about crime from the press. There's been a lot of fear mongering about the crime is going up. So that leads to the perception that crime is going up. And let's face it, crime is also coming in neighborhoods that otherwise didn't experience those crimes. So it's not that crime is rising; it's just in more white neighborhoods, and that's what people are kind of looking at. What I would do is, as I've said, I will prosecute, serious and violent crimes. But what I want to do in the city attorney's office is I want to direct our resources to the crimes that actually affect public safety. City attorney's office cannot do it all. The courts are clogged. I mean, as I go in there, you go, you file a case, and it takes you for a while to actually get the case through. And you've got people who will gladly go to jail because they know they're going to be out in just a couple of weeks. The jails are clogged. So I want to focus our resources on the crimes that are actually affecting public safety and not on the crimes that don't. That will not only make people feel safer, that will make people safer. That's what I want to be focusing on.
Thank you for that response. So same question to you, Hydee, where this anonymous questioner is saying, why do you think the perception of crime is much higher than the actual crime rate? And what would you do as city attorney to make Angelenos feel safer?
I'm not sure that the perception is so different than the actual crime rate. I think it depends on at what point in time do you start to measure the statistics. Okay, if you want to start from 1992, you get one answer. If you want to start from 2012, you get a different answer. And same thing with 2016. So the issue to me is not what is the quote unquote actual crime rate, and it depends on whether it's absolute numbers or per capita, or it's just the statistics are not what is at issue. Faisal, but to me, it's not fear mongering. To me, it's very much a question of, do we feel safe in our homes, in our parks, in our streets, and in our schools? And I stand unequivocally for safe neighborhoods and safe schools and a safe city. And public safety is a real issue. I had a murder 4 houses down not that long ago on my block. My 92-year-old mother, who I live with, sits up and will not go to bed until I get home, and I'm 64 years old. So that's a little silly. But the fact is that our city is today fearful, from hate crimes to gun violence to the perception of a lack of safety, we need to address it as a city. And that does fall to the city attorney as the chief law enforcement officer in large part.
Thank you for that answer. This next question, we'll start with you, Hydee, first, and then Faisal second. This question is about domestic violence, and it comes from Jane. Jane is saying domestic violence is one of the reasons that some women have become homeless, and domestic violence is also a reason that some women end up incarcerated for harming a partner in self-defense. How should the city attorney handle the issue of domestic violence?
Domestic violence is one of the most invidious crimes around because it takes place behind closed doors and it unduly victimizes people in a way that makes it difficult to create a scenario where you can prove the damage beyond a reasonable doubt, which is the standard in a criminal proceeding. It is oftentimes a he said, she said, and domestic violence can devolve down into the loss of life all too often. And so I would use the restraining orders that are available, whether they're gun violence restraining orders or they're DV restraining orders, and I would dedicate resources to enforcing that. I would dedicate resources to education. I would dedicate resources to the lifeline and to training individuals, and it's not just women. I mean, there's something north of 40% of the women on our streets who are homeless because of an incident of domestic violence or a violent partner. But it affects foster youth, it affects children, it affects men. And at the level of our society, we have to keep people safe in their own homes and provide a pathway to safety if those homes become unsafe.
Thank you for that response. Same question for you, Faisal, about domestic violence and how should the city attorney handle the issue of domestic violence?
Yeah, so when I talk about the crimes that affect public safety, domestic violence is one of them. So I want to make sure that we have the resources to actually adequately address those crimes. I want to prosecute, put the resources to prosecute domestic violence. I also want to focus on victim services, where there's and relocation services and their safety. There is a program that we have in the state, which is great in theory, but not so good in practice. As I'm, defending right now somebody who's unfortunately a victim of domestic violence. It's called the Safe at Home program. And that person, we've been trying to get that person resources through the Safe at Home program. And unfortunately, in the city attorney's office, they're just not the resources there for it. So we have to go to the state, which is administered by the Secretary of State's office. But there's lots of issues with the Safe at Home program. For example, if you're living in an apartment, leaving that apartment, changing your name. Then if you change your name to get away from your abuser, getting a driver's license, getting a new social security number, going along with your life. So we do have to focus on the victim, quite a bit as well. I want to prosecute, and then I want to make sure that I put the services there for the victim. And it's something I know a lot about as I, unfortunately defend, many women who have experienced domestic violence.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for the responses to that hugely important issue where women are the victim. Some people in these questions have been saying there's another victim here in Los Angeles, and it's Mother Nature. Looking at the green spaces and wildlife in the city of Los Angeles. And this question is from Shelley Billick, and Shelley's asking, what is your position on the wildlife district ordinance specifically? And what other ordinances do you think work towards protecting nature in the City of Angels? And this question goes to you first, Hydee.
Not fair. The draft ordinance just came out like 2 days ago and I haven't read it yet.
Yeah.
It's been completely revised. It's in my inbox. I was involved in the original wildlife ordinance, and I was actually the person who sounded the alarm because the wildlife ordinance as originally drafted actually narrowed the wildlife corridors as compared to the hillside ordinance by about 50%. And so the savings clause that then was put into the wildlife ordinance was in part because of the alarm bells that I initially rang and that was picked up by any number of activists around the city. I have been pretty involved in trying to keep our city safe and clean and environmentally friendly. I happen to live in CD10. I happen to live in Pico Neighborhood Council, and there's not a single solitary park in my neighborhood council area. not one. We have been struggling with finding corner lots. We've been struggling with finding pathways for the wildlife that has come down from the hillsides, especially as the drought has hit. And I will always be on the side of finding a way to preserve our natural resources and our environment, not only for our own benefit, but for the benefit of those with whom we share it.
So this is something that I experience almost on a regular basis because I live up in North Valley in Porter Ranch and right near the hills. And we have a lot of wildlife. And I also have 3 little young kids, 4, 3, and 20 months. So as we're, in our backyard, we regularly see wildlife coming from the hills. And so basically making sure that we preserve, the wildlife by also keeping, folks safe is something that, that is hugely important to me. Like Hydee, I have not read the new ordinance. I will admit, but basically, what I am going to be focused on is making sure that we can keep, we've got to preserve our open spaces. We've got to preserve our wildlife, and I'm going to work with city council members in making sure we do that while also preserving our wildlife. That's without reading the ordinance, and unfortunately, that's the best I can answer at this time.
Fair enough, understood. It's only been two days, as you said, Hydee, so that makes sense. So this next question, well, I'll say it this way. You've both already talked about corruption in the city of Los Angeles, what you intend to do about that. You've both talked about holding Los Angeles Police Department accountable for various forms of misconduct. This one is a question from Paula. She says the city has experienced corruption that directly costs taxpayers money, like the LADWP billing scandal. And the question for Paula is, what will you do, and this one is directed to you first, Hydee, what will you do to ensure that our city does not foot the bill for government employees' misconduct?
Footing the bill is really a budgetary issue that's in the mayor's office and the city council's office. Here's what I will do with my office. I start with the fact that my office would have never been raided by the Department of Justice. There's a procedure when you're served with a subpoena by the Department of Justice. Hopefully, if you're the city attorney, you're not going to interfere with the Department of Justice investigation. You're going to turn over documents. If you seriously believe that the documents are privileged, you create a privilege log, you go to court on a motion for a protective order or a motion to quash the subpoena, and you ask the judge to review the documents that you think are privileged, and the court says, yes, they are, and therefore you don't have to turn them over, in which case the DOJ can't raid your office for them, or no, they're not privileged, turn them over, in which case you turn them over. So I start there. I go back to my point of no bid contracts. I will not be a rubber stamp for no bid contracts. That's not happening. At the core of the DWP scandal was a $30 million no bid contract that the general manager swore to the commission was something that he needed when he was getting paid a bribe of $1 million plus a car. I would investigate that contract. I would put it out for bid, and my time is up and there's other stuff.
Fair enough. So thank you for that response. And same question to you, Faisal, about the various forms of corruption, including the LADWP billing scandal. And what would you do as city attorney to ensure that Los Angeles does not foot the bill for government employees' misconduct? This is a question from Paula.
Yeah. So again, as I said, corruption is at one of the key points that I'm running on, and I will make sure that I root out corruption in City Hall, not just with city council members and with the mayor's office, but also individual departments. The city attorney's office would not have been raided under my watch because the staff and the personnel that I will have there, will never engage in the activities that the city attorney's office personnel unfortunately was engaging in. And we have to be there in the forefront. DWP scandal, had the city attorney's office been investigating it much sooner than that would not have happened. The other thing that I would point out is litigation strategy here is extremely important. If it does happen, if corruption does occur, how you litigate the case, how you settle the case early on, or you fight the case is extremely important, and it's directly related to how much money at the end of the day that you have to pay out. But the 3 biggest things you got to do is a city attorney has to let everybody know that they are going to go after corruption, and they are going to investigate, that they're just not going to protect people. And then you have to make sure you have the right personnel in place to do that. And then you have to have a strong litigation strategy not to pay out those exorbitant, settlements.
Thank you for those answers. So we're going to go back to a topic we've talked about a little bit before, and it has to do with the secret recording for the 3 city council members and a union representative, where they said all these awful, vile things that got even presidential attention, demanding resignations. So this question is from Susan, and Susan is asking, and this question goes to you first, Hydee. Susan is asking, how can the city attorney find out who made that recording, and was that recording illegal?
The short answer is I have no idea whether it was illegal. It depends on whether it was a recording that was made pursuant to a legitimate wiretap or a FISA warrant, which is something that the DOJ certainly could have done. It depends on whether it is something that was done with someone with the apparent authority at the Fed and whether they posted the appropriate notices to let people know that they might be subject to recording when they came into the building. I mean, I don't know enough of the facts to tell you whether the recording was in fact illegally made. I do know that once the recording was leaked, it was certainly not illegal for the media to publish it. That's something that was established with the Pentagon Papers. And once there is something newsworthy that is out there, it is reportable, and it is a good thing that it came to light. And so whether the tape was originally made legally or illegally, or who did the leak, is not the key issue to me. The key issue is what is revealed on that tape. Focusing on the leaker is a little too reminiscent of the Trumpian White House to me, but hey, I may just be making the wrong analogy.
Fair enough. Well, thank you for that. Faisal, what's your view on whether the city attorney can find out who made that recording, and if you have a view on whether or not it was illegal?
Look, I certainly don't think it was a Department of Justice or any sort of a FISA warrant that was, the Department of Justice does not leak information. But I mean, I also do not believe that that's what we need to be focusing on. As far as I'm concerned, it's a great thing that the recordings came out. I mean, it basically, shined a light on a massive problem that we had in the city council. We had 3 city council members who were not only saying vile things, but were basically dividing up the city for their own benefit and, for lack of a better word, horse trading. So having the sunlight, shine on that type of activity, I think is a very good thing. And from the city attorney's perspective, I certainly would not, launch any sort of an investigation to see, hey, how did we get that? Was it illegal? And if it was, certainly, take any sort of legal steps against the person who leaked it. I would like to know if there's more out there that would shine light on not only House of Labor, on, city council members and what they're doing. So to me, I would not use any of the city attorney's resources to go after that.
Thank you for that answer. And Hydee, this will go to you next. And this is it's an easy one. This is a personal question. This anonymous person is asking you both, how long have you lived in Los Angeles? Maybe tell us about your LA story. So Hydee, we'll go to you first.
I've lived in Los Angeles for 40 years. I moved here in 1982 on graduation from law school. 7 winters on the East Coast was more than enough for me. And I fell in love with the city from the time I moved here. When I got here, the economy was booming. I mean, the entertainment industry has always been a juggernaut, but you had East LA full of young designers and apparel manufacturers that were second to none, except maybe Paris. You had manufacturing all over the city. The 2 largest ladder manufacturers were in the Valley, Warner Ladder and Henry Ladder. That's just a little factoid, but there was manufacturing across the city. We had electronics, aerospace, defense, discs, and then of course my career, which was in financial services. And if I name names like Security Pacific National Bank and B of A, this was a city of opportunity. This was a city of dreams. This was a city of theater spread out all over the place, of hikes, of beaches, of mountains. And the only thing that's gotten better, in my humble opinion, since I got here in '82, is that the brown haze is not quite so bad against the mountains. Everything else has gone downhill, and we need to really get our city back. Thank you.
Thank you for that answer. So Faisal, the same question to you. How long have you been in Los Angeles? What's your LA story?
So I moved to LA first in 2008. And, I moved here with I've got 6 kids. So at that time I had 3 older kids who moved with me. I just had gotten divorced. And I moved to Los Angeles. And it was a great experience for our kids. I had my kids. went to elementary school here, and they've gone to middle school here, and they've gone to high school here, and they've also gone to college here. Then I briefly moved away from Los Angeles to pursue an opportunity in Vermont, and then I moved back. And I moved back because I missed the city, and I missed my kids. I've got, as I said, 3 older kids there. Now I've got 3 younger kids, and I desperately wanted all of my kids to kind of know each other. You know, my oldest son is 32, and my youngest daughter is 20 months. So it's a pretty wide age group difference there. And I wanted everybody to kind of know each other, and wanted to be in the city. So, you know, I've been in the city, and I love the city. And I think what, you know, one of the other things that I would add to what Hydee said is what's also gotten better in Los Angeles is the diversity. You know, we've had a lot more, the city has grown a lot more diverse. And I think that's a fantastic, fantastic thing.
Thank you for that response. So folks, believe it or not, we've only got 9 minutes left in our forum today. We've learned a lot about both candidates, and I do want to applaud both of you so much for the civil discourse you have exhibited tonight. Politics can be a noble profession when practiced the way that we've witnessed it tonight, where we've been civil towards one another. We've added a lot of light to these issues without adding a lot of heat. And I just appreciate the manner of respect that you've held for this forum and for each other. So thank you for that. We're now going to go to our closing statements. These closing statements will first be to you, Faisal, and then to you, Hydee, second. This is based on the coin toss that we had before the program started this evening. And the closing statement will be 2 minutes long. So it will be to you first, Faisal, and then to you, Hydee, second, and then we'll have some closing remarks from our event organizers. So Faisal, in the final 2 minutes, what would you like Los Angeles voters to know?
Well, again, first, I want to thank everybody for showing up to this, to this candidate forum. And I appreciate the League of Women Voters for hosting this and all the other co-hosts. And Kamy, to you, thank you very much for being a phenomenal moderator and keeping this discourse moving. I hope everybody has heard why I want to run. And, it is for criminal justice reform. It is to hold, the city accountable, not just the police department, but other departments, to make sure we root out corruption. It is to make sure we come up with real solutions to the homelessness issue, not to use the criminal justice system as a sword against, homelessness. I think we can have public safety and have criminal justice reform at the same time. I was fortunate enough to come in first in the primary by over 25,000 votes. Our campaign has gotten a lot of momentum. We are endorsed by Supervisor Holly Mitchell, Senator Sidney Kamlager, Senator Steve Bradford, Representative Assemblymember Isaac Bryan, and 2 of the largest unions in Los Angeles, SEIU 2015, SEIU 721, the California Faculty Guild, the California Nurses Association, California Faculty Association, the California Nurses Association. So we've got a lot of labor, with us. In this last couple of weeks, we're going around, we're canvassing almost on a regular basis, daily basis, knocking on people's doors, talking to Angelenos about their problems. And every single door that we knock at, every single person that we talk to, wants to make things safer and wants to have, the homelessness crisis taken care of. But what they absolutely mention is actually do something that will accomplish it. Don't just keep moving the problem from one place to another. And that's what I'm proposing. That's the vision that I'm proposing in this thing, that we're going to take care of the problem. We're not just going to give you empty promises that basically lead to nothing but make it sound good. I'm actually going to do something about it, which is not using the criminal justice system as a sword and actually making Angelenos safe by putting the resources where they need to be. And again, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak tonight.
Thank you for that closing statement, Faisal Gill. And this is to you, Hydee Feldstein Soto. Your closing statement, please, for 2 minutes, and then we'll go back to the event organizers. Hydee, the floor is yours. What would you like Los Angeles voters to know?
I want to start with a thank you also. This is a down ballot, low information race. And so I very much appreciate the forum, the interest of the hosts, and the interest of everyone who's attended. Touching on endorsements, I've been honored and privileged. I have made almost a clean sweep of the newspapers or the major newspapers in LA. I've been endorsed by both the Daily News and the LA Times, and I think I'm the only city level candidate those two papers agreed on. I've been endorsed by La Opinión. I've been endorsed by the Los Angeles Sentinel. There are about a dozen unions. There's about a dozen business organizations. There's the major environmental groups and tenant activists across the city. And I'm very proud of the fact that I am the standard bearer for the Los Angeles County Democratic Party. I have attempted to run a campaign that is inclusive, irrespective of who elects me. I will be representing all Angelenos. And I do know the nooks and crannies of the city. And the city in some ways has gotten more diverse and in other ways less so. When I got here, about 20% of the population, maybe 25% was African American, and today it's down to about 8%. So I guess diversity is very much a question of your perspective. I want to make sure that we protect the diversity. I want to make sure that we give all of our residents a voice. And I want to make sure that we make the city work for all of us. That sometimes requires details, not just vision and values about unspecified ways of holding people accountable. It requires the commitment to get down into the nitty-gritty and to come up with a plan. And I have done that in some significant detail on the topic of homelessness, on the topic of public safety, and on the topic of corruption. With all due respect, I ask you to please vote by November 8th, howsoever you vote. And I most humbly ask for your vote in support of me as your next city attorney. I would be the first woman ever elected to the role. Thank you.
Thank you, Hydee, for those closing statements, and thank you to both candidates for your wonderful display of civil discourse this evening. You've helped voters really understand who you are as people and understand your visions. Should you be elected to the office of city attorney, it's been my great privilege and pleasure and honor, truly, to be able to have this conversation with you tonight. I defer now back to Dr. McTaggart, who is the Executive Director of the League of Women Voters of Greater Los Angeles, for closing statements.
Thank you so much to the candidates for participating. Thank you, Kamy, for your great moderation skills. We were very, very pleased to be involved in this candidate forum. Also, just again, want to thank our co-sponsors, the National Council of Jewish Women of Los Angeles, LA Valley College, and Dornsife Center for Political Future. We are so happy that this forum all came together. So please go out and vote on Election Day on November 8th. Yes, thank you again for everyone who made this possible. And also one shout out to nonpartisan voting resources. So we have votersedge.org, and we also have the Easy Voter Guide that can shed some nonpartisan light on statewide propositions that will be on your ballot. So please check those out for more information. And again, thank you so much.